One could argue that, if the palace had ever thought to feed its own kitchen staff, Vesla would not have been standing close enough to the high table to ruin her life. But then again, if the kitchens had been properly stocked, she would not have been sent up with the late wine at all. And if the wine had not run short, the steward would not have needed a girl with quick hands and no name to fill the gap at the head of the hall. So, really, when one thought about it, the whole thing was the palace's fault. All of it. Every part. Vesla would have liked very much to explain this to somebody. Nobody ever asked. She had served in the Great Hall of Hollowmere for 11 years, and in all that time, she had learned the single most useful skill a servant could own, which was the art of not being seen. She knew how to move along a wall without disturbing the air. She knew how to set a cup down so quietly that the man drinking from it never once looked up to find out who had filled it. She knew where to stand, so that the light from the candlestands fell just short of her, and she stood there always with a jug on her hip and her eyes on the middle distance, and the great and the powerful of the realm ate and drank and schemed a handspan from her elbow, and never knew she was in the room. It was, she had always thought, a fine arrangement. Invisible people were rarely blamed for anything. Tonight was the Feast of the Turning, which meant the hall was packed to the beams, and the wine was going down faster than 3 kitchens could carry it. Vesla had been on her feet since before dawn. Her back had stopped complaining hours ago, and had moved on to a kind of sullen silence. The lords of Carith were red-faced and loud, and the visiting delegation from the northern reaches sat stiff and dry-eyed among them, refusing every third dish, and old Andra, who ran the kitchens the way a general runs a siege, had already broken 2 ladles over the heads of boys who deserved worse. And at the top of it all, on the raised stone dais, with the moon of his house carved white above him, sat the king. Vesla had seen him, perhaps a dozen times in her life, always from a distance, always from an angle. Caver of Carith was young for a king, and there was a great deal of talk about that in the kitchens, most of it unkind. He had come to the throne at 19, and had spent the 6 years, since being underestimated with tremendous enthusiasm by everyone who had ever met him. He was handsome in a way that made people careless around him. He smiled easily. He laughed at things a king ought not to laugh at. He had a habit of agreeing with whoever had spoken last, which the court took as weakness, and which Vesla, who had spent 11 years watching men lie to one another over dinner, had privately begun to suspect was something else, entirely. Not that her suspicion mattered. She poured wine. That was the whole of it. The horn sounded, and the hall came slowly, grumbling, to its feet. Vesla knew what came next, because it came every year, and every year it was the same, and every year it was slightly embarrassing for everybody involved. The sacred moon greeting, the old rite. The king would rise and speak the first half of the blessing into the silence, and then there would be a pause, and then the silence would simply go on, because there was nobody left in the world to speak the second half, and there had not been for 100 years. It was tradition. It was also, everybody agreed, a bit of a farce. The greeting was a call and an answer, and the answer had died out with the moon speakers, and no living soul knew the words. Some said they had been lost. Some said they had been burned. Andra, who was old and had opinions, said the answer had never been written down at all, because it was never meant to be read. It was meant to be known. Whatever the truth of it, the effect was always the same. The king spoke and nothing came back, and the court stood there in the awkward hush like men waiting for a joke to arrive. And then everyone sat down and drank a great deal more than before. Vesla, who had a jug of red on her hip and a spreading ache behind her eyes, did not much care one way or the other. She shifted her weight to the wall. Somebody in a plain gray servant's coat was standing a pace to her left with his own jug, a man she had never seen before, one of the new hands from the kitchens, and he had the stillness of somebody who had also been on his feet since dawn. She gave him the flicker of a nod that servants give one another and thought nothing more about it. Concavar rose. The hall fell quiet. He was very good at this part, Vesla had to admit. He let the silence stretch, and he did not hurry, and when he finally spoke, his voice went out across the hall like a stone, skipped over still water. Under the old moon, he said, I greet the house of my blood, and the blood of my house, and the long road walked between them, the words hung there. And then, exactly as they had for 100 years, the words kept hanging there, because nothing answered them. And the court began that slow, collective shuffle of men, trying to look solemn and wanting their supper. And Vesla opened her mouth. She did not decide to. That was the thing she would come back to afterwards, again and again, turning it over like a coin. She could not spend. She did not decide anything. The words were simply there, sitting behind her teeth, as though they had been waiting 11 years in the dark of her mouth for someone to come along and knock. And when the king's voice stopped, they went out of her the way breath goes out of a sleeping woman. Under the same moon, she whispered. I answer, and the road is walked, and the house is not alone. She heard her own voice do it. She heard it from the outside, thin and low and absolutely certain, as though it belonged to somebody standing just behind her. Nobody in the hall heard her. She was quite sure of that. She was against the wall, 40 paces from the dais, and the court was already scraping its chairs, and a whisper from a girl with a jug does not travel over the noise of 200 hungry men sitting down. Nobody heard her, except that the man in the gray servant's coat, a pace to her left, had gone very still. He turned his head. He looked at her. And Vesla, still holding the wine, still pressed against the cold stone with her heart beginning to slam, watched the man beside her take one long, careful breath, as though he had just heard something that changed the shape of the world, and she understood in that single, suspended moment that she had been heard after all. She told nobody. This was not courage. It was arithmetic. Vesla had spent her whole life being nothing in particular, and she had learned the exact weight of a thing you could not explain. She could not explain this. She did not know the words she had spoken. She had never read them, never been taught them, never in her life heard them said aloud, and yet they had come out of her whole, and finished, and in the right order, and if she could not explain them to herself, in the quiet of her own bunk, she certainly could not explain them to anybody else. She lay awake until the gray came up in the window over the drying racks, saying the words back to herself, in the dark, and every time they came out, the same. Under the same moon. I answer, the house is not alone. They did not feel like a memory, they felt like a scar. Something the body kept whether the mind agreed to it or not. By the second bell, the kitchens were already talking. Somebody answered, Mirren said, elbow deep in a pot, eyes shining. That is what they are saying upstairs, that the greeting was answered. Nobody answered, said Tobin, who was 15, and considered himself a realist. The hall was full of drunk lords. One of them coughed. A cough. Mirren rounded on him. A cough, Tobin. That made the king go pale as a bone and stand there for a full count of 10 before he sat back down. Vesla, scrubbing at a pan that had stopped being dirty some time ago, said nothing at all. She had not seen the king go pale. She had not seen anything after the man in the gray coat turned his head, because she had put her jug on the sideboard with hands she could not feel, and walked out of the hall at a speed that would have got her whipped if anyone had been watching. And she had not stopped walking until she was 3 floors down with her back against a cellar door and the taste of copper in her mouth. Well, I think it was a servant, Mirren said, lowering her voice with relish. That is the rumor. That is what Rilla heard from the pages. A servant spoke the answer. Tobin snorted. And where would a servant learn it? That, said Mirren happily, is exactly what everybody upstairs is trying to work out. Vesla scrubbed. The pan was going to have a hole in it soon. She thought about the 100 years. That was the piece that would not sit down and be quiet. Not the strangeness of the words in her mouth, but the length of the silence they had broken. 100 years was a long time for something to stay lost. Things were only lost that long, Andra always said, when somebody had taken a great deal of trouble to lose them. And if somebody had taken that trouble, then somebody somewhere was going to be extremely unhappy that the trouble had just been undone. By a girl with a jug. Against a wall. Vesla put the pan down. She was not a fool. She knew what she was, and she knew exactly what she was worth. Because the man who had raised her had told her kindly and often for 11 years. Haldren had found her at 7 years old, on the wrong side of the outer gate, in a winter that had killed better children, and he had given her a place in his kitchens, and he had given her bread, and he had given her the only thing that had ever been truly hers, which was work. She could still hear him saying it, in the mild, patient voice he used on her when she was small and had reached above herself. You are not a clever girl, Vesla, you are not a beautiful one. But you are a useful one, and useful outlasts both. Stay small and stay useful, and this place will always have a corner for you. She had built her whole life on that sentence. She had folded herself down to fit inside it. And last night, without permission, some part of her that had never once been small had stood up in the middle of a royal feast and spoken to a king. Vesla, Andra's voice, from the kitchen door. Well. She turned, and she knew, instantly, from the old woman's face, Andra had run these kitchens through 2 reigns. She had faced down a fire, a famine and a fever, and she had never in 11 years looked at Vesla the way she was looking at her now. The steward wants you, Andra said. The floor tilted very gently. Haldren, of course. Haldren, who was the steward of Hollowmere, who held the keys to every door in the palace and the whole of Vesla's life in his hand. Haldren, who would ask her, in that mild, patient voice, what exactly she had been doing, standing at the head of the hall, and she would have to look him in the eye and lie to the only man who had ever given her anything. Or she would have to tell him the truth, and she did not know which was worse. Andra, she said, and her voice came out wrong. Andra, I need to tell you something. But the old woman was not listening. Andra was looking past her, at the far door of the kitchen, the one that led up to the yard, and her face had gone perfectly gray. The door was open. There were 2 men standing in it, and they were not kitchen men, and they were not the steward's men either. They wore the white moon of the king's own guard on the breast, and they had come down into the steam and the grease and the ruined pans of the lower kitchens, where no man of the king's own had set foot in living memory, and they were looking directly at her. Vesla, said the first one. Of the kitchens, every single person in the room had stopped moving. You will come with us, he said. Now, they did not tell her where they walked her up. That was the part that frightened her most, because in the palace of Hollowmere, up was where the trouble was. Servants went down when they were in disgrace. They were sent to the cellars, to the drains, to the laundries, and if they were very unlucky, they were sent out of the gate, with nothing but the clothes they stood in. Nobody was ever taken up. She went up 4 flights. Then a corridor with a floor so polished she could see the shape of herself moving across it. A small figure in a kitchen apron, flanked by 2 men in white, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that she had never once seen herself in a floor before. Her mind offered her a number of possibilities, each worse than the last. The wine, the words, the wall. She thought of the way that man in the gray coat had turned his head and gone still, and she wondered who he had run to, and how fast. She was going to lose her place. That was the floor of it, the very worst thing she permitted herself to imagine, because underneath that floor was another one, and she was not going to look at it. She had nothing. She had never had anything. Haldren had given her a corner, and she had ruined it in a single unguarded breath at the wrong end of a long night. And now she would be put out of the gate at 18, and she had no family, no trade, no coin, and no name. Stay small and stay useful. She had failed at both, in one sentence. The guards stopped at a door. One of them opened it, and neither of them followed her in, and the door closed behind her with a soft and terrible finality. It was a council room. Long table, cold hearth, tall windows with the gray morning pressing at them. And there was one man in it standing at the far end with his back to her and his hands braced on the table, looking down at a map. He did not appear to be reading. He was wearing a plain, gray servant's coat. Vesla's stomach dropped through the polished floor. "You are quick," said King Kavar of Kareth, without turning round. "I sent for you an hour ago and told them not to hurry you. I thought you might want breakfast first." He turned. She had seen him a dozen times in 11 years, always from an angle, always at a distance, and every one of those times, he had been a shape on a dais wearing his crown, like a joke he was in on. Up close, he was something else. He was tall, and he was unfairly catastrophically handsome. Dark hair pushed back with the carelessness of a man who had not slept, and his eyes were a pale winter gray that did not go at all with the easy set of his mouth. It was the wrongness of him that undid her. The smile said one thing. The eyes were somewhere else entirely counting. He had stood beside her against a wall, for the better part of an hour, holding a jug, and she had nodded to him like a fellow servant, and he had nodded back. Vesla went down on one knee so fast she nearly took the chair with her. "Your Majesty," she said to the floor, "whatever I have done, stand up, Your Majesty. I do not know what I did. I swear it. I have served in this house since I was 7 years old, and I have never once." "Vesla." He said her name gently, which was somehow worse than shouting. "Stand up, please. I cannot have a conversation with the top of a head." She stood. She kept her eyes on his collar, which was a servant's collar, badly stitched, and the sheer wrongness of it made her want to laugh, or be sick. "Do you know what you said last night?" he asked. "No, Majesty. That is not an answer. That is a defense." He came around the table. He did not hurry. "Let me ask it differently. Where did you learn it?" "I did not learn it." Her voice cracked. "Majesty, I am telling you the truth. And I know how it sounds. I have never heard those words in my life. They were simply there, and they came out of me. And I have been sitting up all night trying to work out where they came from, and I have got nothing. Nothing at all." She waited for him to call her a liar. She waited for the door to open behind her, and the white coats to come back in. Instead, the king was very quiet. She risked one glance up and found him looking at her with an expression she could not read at all, something so still and so hungry that she dropped her eyes again immediately. 100 years, he said, almost to himself. 100 years, and the whole of my court and the finest scholars in 3 realms, and a girl with a wine jug. Majesty, I will never speak them again. I will never speak of it. I will go back down to the kitchens, and you will never hear my name." "No," said the king. "I am afraid that is not going to happen." Something in the room changed. He straightened, and the tiredness went out of his shoulders, and Vesla felt her own skin lift, because whatever had just come into the room with him was not a young man in a borrowed coat. It was the Alpha. Her own wolf, which had spent 11 years lying down in the dark being useful, came up onto its feet inside her like a hound hearing a horn. "Here is what is going to happen," he said. "In 1 hour I am going to walk into my great hall in front of my court and the northern delegation and every man in this palace who wishes me dead, and I am going to tell them that the sacred moon greeting was answered last night. Because it was. And I am going to tell them who answered it. Majesty, and then I am going to tell them," he went on, "that you are my moon bound, that I have known it since the winter, and that you have been kept quiet in my own kitchens for your safety while the arrangements were made." Vesla stared at him. "That," she said, "is a lie." "It is an enormous lie," the king agreed pleasantly. "It is possibly the largest lie ever told in this hall, and I intend to tell it very well. Why?" He did not answer that. He walked to the window instead and looked down into the yard, and for a moment the smile was entirely gone from his face, and what was left was a young man who had not slept and was doing arithmetic he did not like the result of. 2 months ago, he said, I fell ill after a hunt. The physicians called it a bad cask of wine, and I let them because it was simpler. Then a horse went lame under me on a road that had no stones in it. He tapped the glass once with one finger. I have a great many people in this house who are extremely fond of me. Vesla, I would very much like to know which of them is counting the days. That has nothing to do with me, she whispered. Kavar turned from the window and looked at her, and there was nothing easy in his face at all. It has everything to do with you, he said. It has since the moment you opened your mouth. There is one thing I can tell you for certain, and I want you to hear it before I take you downstairs and put a crown's worth of danger around your neck. He crossed to her. He stopped close enough that she had to tip her chin to hold his eyes. You were not the only person in that hall who heard what you said. The floor of the world, the one Vesla had refused to look at, quietly opened. You are not being punished, said the king softly. You are being kept. There is a difference, and you will not enjoy either of them. He told the lie beautifully. Vesla stood at the foot of the dais in a borrowed gown that did not fit her anywhere, with 200 faces turned up at her like plates, and listened to the king of Kareth explain to his court that he had known since the winter. He was very calm about it. He mentioned the old blood. He mentioned the will of the moon. He said the word betrothed the way other men said the word weather, and the hall made a sound Vesla had never heard a room make before, a long, low collective exhalation, as though every man in it had been holding his breath for 100 years, and had only now been given leave to let it go. She kept her eyes on the middle distance, because that was what she knew how to do, and because she had spent 11 years learning to look at nothing while seeing everything. She saw the faces that did not move. 3 of them. A gray lord near the north wall whose hand closed slowly on the back of a chair, a man of the northern delegation who leaned to the woman beside him and did not take his eyes off Vesla while he spoke into her ear. And at the side door, holding a ledger he had no reason to be holding in the great hall at midday, the steward of Hollomere Holdren, was smiling. That was the thing that put the cold in her. He was smiling the way he had smiled at her over 11 years, the mild, patient smile of a man watching a useful thing perform its use, and he did not look surprised at all. Afterwards, when the hall had emptied and the court had gone off to be astonished at one another, the king found her in the passage behind the dais, with her back against the stone. You did not faint, he observed. I had money on it. I want to go back to the kitchens. I know. They are all going to hate me. Oh, enormously, Kavar agreed. I supper, somebody will have decided you seduced me with a soup. Give it a week, and there will be a ballad. He tilted his head. Come with me. I want to ask you something, and I do not want to ask it in a room with a door on it. She followed him because she had no choice, and because she was beginning dangerously to want to. He took her out along the high gallery, and then he stopped, and he turned to her. And he said, the thing she was not expecting, show me your palace. Vesla blinked. Majesty. I have lived in Hollomere my entire life, he said. I know the throne room and the council room and the hunting road, and I know the 7 or 8 men who tell me what happens in the rest of it, and I have recently come to suspect that at least one of those men is lying to me. He put his hands in his pockets. You have lived here 11 years, and I could not have picked you out of a crowd of 3. I stood beside you for an hour, holding a jug, and you took me for a kitchen hand, which, by the way, was the most restful hour I have had in 6 years. So, show me the palace. I do not know. It is not a palace, she said, before she could stop herself. Not the part I know. It is a set of veins. Something lit behind his eyes. Then show me the veins. So she did. She took him down. Not the stairs the court used, the wide ones with the carved rails, but the servants' stairs, the narrow black spirals that ran inside the walls like a second skeleton. She took him along the passage behind the West Hall, where you could hear every word spoken at the high table, and where the wine boys had been listening to state secrets for a century, and repeating none of them, because nobody had ever told them the secrets were worth anything. She showed him the 4 separate doors into the council wing, and the fact that only one of them was ever watched. She showed him the laundry chute a grown man could go down if he was determined and did not mind the landing. Caver of Carif followed her through the dark and the damp with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he did not once complain, and he did not once tell her a thing she had said was interesting, which she found she preferred, because he simply asked another question instead. Who empties the council room? 2 women, Nella and old Perrin. When? After. Always after. The fires get banked. The cups get taken. So anything left on that table, he said slowly, is seen by 2 women that nobody in this palace has ever once asked a question of. Nobody asks us anything, said Vesla. That is the point of us. He stopped in the passage and looked at her, and in the light of the single lamp she was carrying, his face was doing something she could not name. Say that again, he said. Nobody asks us anything. No. He shook his head. The other part. The point of us. She had not meant to say it. She said it anyway, because he was standing there waiting as though her answer were worth waiting for, and nobody had ever done that in her life. We are furniture, she said. You are all very careful with each other, and you are all very careful with the guards, and you are careful with your ministers and your lords and your visitors. And then a woman comes in to bank the fire, and you go on talking. Because we are not people, we are the room. She lifted her chin. So we hear everything, Majesty, all of us. We hear who owes what and who hates whom and which lord went to which door, at which hour. We have always heard it. It has simply never once occurred to any of you to ask. The passage was very quiet. Vesla, said the king. Majesty. You have just told me, he said, that I have had the finest intelligence service in the realm, working in my own house for 11 years, unpaid, and that I have spent that entire time walking past it. She said nothing because her throat had closed. Then, here is what I am going to do. He reached into his coat and took out something small, and he put it into her hand and closed her fingers over it, and his hand was warm and dry, and absolutely certain, and she forgot how to breathe. That is the king's token. Any door in this house, any hour, any man who stops you, will answer to me for it. She stared at the thing in her palm, a disc of white metal worn smooth, with the moon of his house on the face of it. I am a waitress, she said stupidly. You are the only person in this palace who has told me a true thing in 2 months, said Kavar. Now show me where you would stand if you wanted to hear a king and not be seen doing it. And Vesla, because she was already 3 steps ahead of him and had been since he asked the first question, took him to the listening niche behind the council room, the one every kitchen child knew and no lord had ever heard of, and she lifted her lamp into it and stopped dead. The floor of the niche was thick, with 100 years of dust, and somebody had been standing in it. There were footprints, not one set. Many, layered over each other, the same boots coming back and back, and the dust had been pressed down into a shape like the soul of a man who had stood a long time in one place, patiently, night after night, listening. And there was wax. Fresh wax, still soft when she put her thumbnail into it, spilled down the stone in a thin white run. Majesty, she said, this is not old. Kavar did not answer. Suh. She turned, lamp lifted, and found him looking at the footprints, with an expression that had no surprise in it whatsoever. And something cold went down the back of her neck, because Vesla had spent 11 years reading the faces of powerful men across a wine jug, and she knew shock when she saw it, and she was not seeing it. You knew, she said. I suspected. You suspected. Her voice came out flat. You suspected somebody was standing in a hole in your wall listening to your counsel, and you asked a kitchen girl to walk you to it in the dark. Yes, said the king simply. I did, and that was when the lamp went out. She did not see the hand that did it. She felt the air move, and the flame died, and the passage dropped into a black so total that her eyes made shapes out of nothing, and every single thing Vesla knew about this house arrived in her at once, in her feet, in her hands, in the count of her own steps. Somebody was in the passage with them, and they had come from the far end, and they had come quietly, which meant they knew the floor. "Do not move," she breathed. "I was not going to. Do not speak." Steel came off leather. She heard it perfectly. 3 paces down and to the left. And she reached back with her free hand and found the king's coat and got a fistful of it and pulled. She could not fight. That was the plain and awful arithmetic of it. She had never held a blade in her life. She was a woman of average height with a wine jug's worth of strength in her arms, and there was at least one man in this passage who had come here to kill, and possibly there were more. But she knew the house. She knew it, the way she knew her own hands. She pulled him left, and there was no wall where the wall should be, because there was a gap there, a doorless slot into the old flue that the boys used to get to the roof, and she got him into it as the first blade went through the space where his back had been, and struck the stone. She saw 3 men, faces wrapped. "Good boots. Up," she said. "Now, hands on the iron. Climb, Vesla. Climb." He climbed. She went after him, and a hand closed on her ankle, and she did the only violent thing she had ever done in her life, which was to kick backwards with everything she had into a face she could not see, and something broke, and the hand let go. And then a blade came up after her, and opened her calf, from the knee down, and she did not make a sound, because making a sound would tell them where she was. They came out on the roof of the west kitchens into rain and gray daylight, and Vesla dropped onto the wet lead and lay there with her leg on fire, and the king of Kerith knelt over her in a servant's coat with the water running off his hair, and he was saying her name. "I am fine," she said. "You are not." "I am fine, Majesty, and there are 3 men in your wall." "There are 3 men in my wall," he agreed, "and they are already gone, because they went the moment they lost us. And they went in good order, and they did not panic." He said it evenly, too evenly, which is not how thieves behave. Vesla lay in the rain and looked up at him. "You are not frightened," she said. He did not answer. "Somebody just tried to open your throat in the dark, and you are kneeling in the rain, and you are not frightened." She pushed herself up on one elbow. "How many times, Vesla? How many times has it been, Majesty?" For half a moment something real moved behind his face, and she saw it, and she would think about it for weeks afterwards. Then it was gone, and the easy smile came back over it like a lid on a pot. "You are bleeding," said Kavar gently. "Let us see to the leg." And Vesla let him take her arm, and let him walk her down out of the rain, and said nothing at all. But she started counting. They gave her a room. It was upstairs, which she still could not get used to. And it had a window, which she had never once had, and a bed she did not fit into properly, because 11 years of sleeping on a plank had taught her body to lie straight and narrow, like a knife in a drawer. The court called her the moon-bound. The kitchens called her nothing at all, because the kitchens had stopped speaking to her the day she went up, and that was the wound she had not braced for. Mirren looked through her. Tubin looked at his boots. Only Andras spoke, and only once, and what she said was, "Be careful, girl," in a voice like a hand on a wrist. So Vesla did what she was good at. She watched. She watched for 4 weeks, and she wrote nothing down, because she did not need to. She watched which lords came to the council wing at hours they had no business being there. She watched the Grey Lord from the north wall, whose name was Corvin, put his hand on a chair back every time the king spoke, and take it off again every time the king stopped. She watched the northern delegation, who had come to sign a treaty, and had somehow not signed it, and she counted the days they did not sign, and she watched the king. That was the trouble. She had meant to watch him for danger. He came to her room in the mornings with 2 cups of tea, and sat on her window ledge, and asked her what she had seen, and she told him, and he listened. He listened with his whole face. He would go quiet in the middle of a sentence, and she would watch the thought go through him, like weather. And then he would ask the exact question that broke the thing open, and something in her chest would turn over and she would have to look at her tea. He never once told her what she was worth. He simply behaved as though it were already settled, which was worse, because there was nothing to argue with. She asked him about the men in the wall, and he told her a joke. She asked him about the hunt and the horse, and he told her she was beautiful when she was suspicious. And she said that was not an answer, and he said no, it was not, and smiled at her until she looked away first. He gave her nothing she could use. He gave her a great deal. She did not know where to put. It crept up on her, like a fever. The first morning she caught herself watching his hands on the cup. She was so appalled that she said something unforgivably rude to him, and he laughed for a full minute. The night he came up to the East Tower, where she had gone to think, and stood beside her at the rail in the cold, close enough that his sleeve was against her arm, she found she could not hear a single word he said, because all of her had gone into that one line of contact from shoulder to elbow, 4 inches of wool. And she stood there in a state of total disgrace, with her heart going like a hare. "You have gone quiet," he said. "I am thinking." She was not thinking. She had not thought a coherent thought in 3 weeks. And underneath all of it, quiet and steady and getting louder, was the other thing. The words were coming back, not all at once, in pieces, the way a bruise comes up. She would be halfway through banking a fire, and a phrase would arrive in the back of her mouth, whole and finished, in a tongue she had never learned. She would wake in the dark with a line of it on her tongue, like the taste of iron. They were not sentences she was making. They were sentences that were already there. And she was only finding them. The way you find a step in the dark, with your foot. And they were not all greetings. Some of them were warnings. She sat on the edge of the bed, in the gray of a 4th-week morning, with her hands flat on her knees, and she said one of them out loud, quietly, into the empty room, just to hear it. Just to know. The words came out of her low and certain, the way they always did, and the hair went up on her arms, because she understood, in the moment of saying it, that she knew exactly what it meant. It meant, the mouth that lies is close to the ear that listens. Vesla sat very still, and behind her, from the open door she had been absolutely certain she had closed, came a voice she had known since she was 7 years old. "Say that again," said Haldren, softly. "Say it again, child, and this time, say it slowly." She told him nothing. That was the strange part, the part she turned over afterwards, like a stone in a shoe. Haldren stood in her doorway with his mild, patient face and asked her to say it again, and Vesla, who had never once in 11 years refused that man anything, opened her mouth and heard herself say, "Say what, sir? I was praying." And Haldren looked at her for a long moment. "Of course you were," he said. "Forgive an old man his ears." And he smiled, and he went away. And he closed the door behind him with great care, and Vesla sat on the edge of her bed and shook for a quarter of an hour. She did not know why she had lied. She only knew that some animal thing under her ribs had put its hand over her mouth, and that she had learned at some point in the last 4 weeks to listen to it. She went to find the king. He was in the long gallery, alone at the window, doing what he did when he thought nobody was watching, which was nothing at all. No smile, no easy hands, just a young man standing in a cold room, looking at a courtyard. "You are limping," he said, without turning. "It is healing. It will scar. Most things do." He turned then, and something in her chest pulled hard enough to hurt. "Ask me," she said. "Ask you what?" "Whatever it is you come to my room, to ask me every morning without ever asking it." Her voice was rising, and she could not get underneath it. 4 weeks, Majesty. 4 weeks of tea, and questions and jokes. You have wanted it since the first hour. Everybody in this palace has always wanted something from me, and, at least they had the courtesy to say the word aloud, and you will not, and I cannot. Vesla, I cannot keep doing this, she said, and to her horror her voice broke on it. I am not built for this. I was made small, and I was made useful, and I know exactly how to be both of those things. And I do not know how to be a woman who is looked at. And you look at me, and I lie awake. And I have started wanting things I have no business wanting, and I need you to tell me what you actually want so that I can put myself back where I belong. The gallery was very quiet. You have not once asked me what I want, she said. Have you noticed that? Not once. Kaivar crossed the room. He did not hurry. He came to a stop close enough that she had to look up at him, and he did not touch her, and the not touching was somehow louder than anything. What do you want? He said. She could not speak. No, he said softly. You do not get to duck it now. You have been throwing that word at me for a month like a stone. What do you want, Vesla? You know what I want. I want to hear you say it. Why? Because you have spent your entire life being told what you are for, said the king, and I am not going to be one more man who decides it for you. And Vesla, who had never asked anybody for anything, who had eaten what she was given and slept where she was put, and folded herself down for 11 years into the shape of a corner, looked up into the face of the king of Kerith and said, I want you. Gods help me. He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not careful. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding something in both hands for a very long time, and had finally been given leave to put it down, and it went through her like the words had gone through her, from somewhere she had never been told about, and her back met the cold glass of the window and she did not feel it. His hands came up to her face, and she made a sound against his mouth that she would have died of, if she had had any capacity left for dying. Tell me to stop, he said, against her jaw ragged. No, Vesla. If you stop, she said, I will never forgive you. And then there was no more talking, and the long gallery was empty, and the door was shut, and she had his coat in both fists, and the whole architecture of the woman she had spent her life building came quietly and completely apart in her hands. Afterwards, in the dark in a bed she still did not fit into, she lay with her head on his chest, and listened to his heart do its work, and thought that she had never in her life been warm before, and had simply never known it. The way a fish does not know it is wet. Say something, she murmured. I am afraid, said Kavar, that if I say anything you will remember to be sensible. She laughed into his ribs. She had been wanted for her hands. She had been wanted for her silence and her steadiness, and the fact that she could carry 4 plates and hear nothing at all. She had never once in 18 years been wanted for no reason but wanting, and she had not known, until this exact moment in the dark, that she had been starving. Kava, she said his name out loud, the first time. She felt him go still under her cheek. Say it again, he said. And she did. The Northern King came to sign the treaty on the last day of the month, and Hollowmere put on its best face for him. Vesla wore green. She had a maid now, which was an ongoing indignity, and a name at the door, which was worse. When the herald called her, the whole of the great hall turned, and she walked down the length of it, past every man who had ever handed her an empty cup without looking up, and she kept her chin level, and she did not once look for the wall. Kavar was waiting at the top of the steps, and the look on his face when he saw her was not a king's look at all. Careful, she murmured, taking his arm. They are watching you. Let them look. It will do them good. He bent his head. You have no idea, do you, what you look like? You are standing there, thinking about the wine service. I was thinking they have understaffed the east table. Gods, said the king delighted. I am going to marry you. She lost her hold on herself for 1 whole second, and had to look at the floor. King Orsan of the Northern Reaches was a large, silent, deeply cautious man who had spent the month refusing to sign a treaty for reasons he would not name, and Vesla, who had watched him for 4 weeks over a wine jug, could have told anybody why. He did not trust Kerith. He did not trust Kerith because somebody had been feeding him letters that said Kerith could not be trusted, And Vesla had watched the man's face every time a letter came in, and she had watched which door the letters came through, and she had been saving it. Later. She would tell Kavar, later. They went out onto the moon terrace for the rite, because that was tradition. The whole court, spilling out into the cold, under the open sky, and it was there, standing at the rail, with the wind coming up off the valley, that his mask came off. "You hate this," she said. "Hate is a strong word. You are lying." He laughed, surprised, and then the laugh went out of him, and what was left was very tired. "I was 19, he said. "Did you know that when they put it on me?" 19 and my father 3 days in the ground, and I stood in that hall and looked out at 400 men who had known me since I was in short coats, and I understood in about a heartbeat that not one of them was ever going to tell me the truth again. He turned the cup in his hands, so I gave them what they wanted. A boy king, charming, harmless. Underestimate me, please. It is so much more restful, for both of us." His mouth twisted. "And I have been doing it so long that I do not always know where the performance stops, which is not a thing a man ought to say out loud." Vesla reached up and put her hand against his face. His breath caught. The false smile came apart like wet paper, and then it happened. It came in through her palm, through the 4 inches of contact between her skin and his, and it was not a thought, and it was not a sound, it was him. Relief. A great aching tide of loneliness that had been running under that easy face for 6 years, and something else beneath it, so tender and so frightened that she felt her own eyes go hot. She jerked her hand back. Kavar was staring at her, and his pupils had blown wide, and he was not breathing. "You felt that," he said. "Vesla, you felt that." It was nothing. The word went into him like a nail. She watched it happen. She watched the light go out behind his eyes and the mask slide back over the wound. Neat and quick and practiced. "Of course," he said quietly. "Nothing. You are quite right. Kavar, I did not mean." But the herald was calling the court to the rail for the rite, and the crowd was moving, and Vesla, caught in the press of it, saw the mason's boy at the terrace door. She saw him because she had been a servant for 11 years, and she knew what a frightened servant looked like. He was white to the lips. He was looking at the balustrade, and then at the door, and then at the balustrade again. The steward's man asked him mildly, in passing, whether the terrace stone had been checked. "Yes, sir," said the boy. "This morning, sir." And Vesla heard the lie. She heard it, the way you hear a cracked bell, in a peal of good ones, a wrongness that had nothing to do with the boy's face, or his voice, or anything she could have explained to a magistrate. It was in the shape of the words. It was in the air. It was the old blood standing up in her and saying, "That is not true." Kavar was 3 paces from the rail. She did not think. She went through the crowd like a thrown stone, and she got 2 fistfuls of the King of Karis' coat, and she hauled him backwards off his feet and took them both down onto the flagstones, and the great carved balustrade of the moon terrace, 40 feet of it, went out into the dark without a sound. It hit the courtyard a long moment later, and the sound went up the walls of Hollowmere like thunder in a barrel. The screaming started after that. She sat on the stone with the King of Carith's head in her lap, and the wind coming through the gap where the rail had been, and the court running in every direction like water off a table, and she found she was perfectly calm. "That was for you," she said. "Yes, that is 3. Vesla, that is 3. Kavar, and I want to know." He got up, he looked at the gap, and then he took her by the shoulders, and he said the thing she was not ready for. "You will tell nobody." She stared at him. "There is a foreign king 20 feet from here who has spent a month deciding whether we are a house he can sign a treaty with," Kavar said, low and fast. "If he learns that a king of Carith was very nearly murdered on his own terrace, under his own moon, at his own feast, he will be on the road home by dawn, and there will be soldiers on that border inside a year. It will read as an accident. It will be reported as an accident, and you will say, 'Nothing to anyone, including Haldren, including Andra, including me, unless the door is locked. You want me to smile, she said. You want me to go back in there and smile and pour wine. Yes, and how many more, Majesty? How many more accidents before somebody does not miss? His face broke. He pulled her against him, hard, and he put his mouth against her hair. I need you to trust me, he said. Just this once. There is a thing I have to do tonight, and I cannot do it if the house is awake. Please. Trust me. And Vesla, with her heart in pieces and her hands still shaking, said, All right. She lied. She gave him a count of 30. Then she followed. She went the servant's way, of course, because she was the only person in Hollowmere who could follow a king through his own palace without being seen, and she went down through the veins of the house with her heart going like a drum. And she came out in the passage behind the old archive, the sealed one, the one that had been locked since before her birth. The door was open. There was a lamp inside. Vesla stood in the dark of the passage and looked through the gap. The King of Kerith was standing at a table, with the great rolls of the house spread out under his hands. He was not searching. He knew exactly where he had come to, and he was looking down at an open page with an expression she had never seen on his face in a month of watching him, which was grief. She pushed the door. He came round fast and stopped. Vesla, he said. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the page, and at the line of old script running down it, and at the one word on it she could read, because it was the only word anybody had ever given her. That is my name, she said. Kavar did not move. That is 100 years old, and that is my name. Her voice did not sound like hers. Explain it to me. Sit down. Do not tell me to sit down. Vesla. He closed his eyes for a second. You are going to want to be sitting down. She did not sit. She stood in the door of a room that had been locked since before she was born, and she watched the man she had been in bed with that morning arrange his face into the careful, gentle, terrible expression of a person about to be kind to you. The moon speakers were not lost, he said. They were killed. The lamp guttered. They were a bloodline, he said. They were bound to this house for 400 years, and the tie between a speaker and a king was not a marriage, and it was not a servitude. It was something the old rolls do not have a word for. But that is not what made them precious. He put one finger on the page. It was the ear. A moonspeaker hears a lie, Vesla, not from a face, not from a tell, from the words themselves, the moment they leave the mouth. Every king of Kerith for 400 years had somebody standing beside him who could not be deceived. The floor was a long way away. And a king who cannot be lied to, Kaivar said, cannot be managed. He cannot be steered, and he cannot be robbed, and he cannot be led gently by the elbow into war or out of it. He is, from the point of view of the men who make their living by managing kings, an absolute catastrophe. The stewards, she whispered. The stewards, he agreed. One family. 100 years ago they ended the whole line in a single winter, and they put it about that the words have been lost, and they have had the ear of every king of Kerith from that day to this. My great-grandfather. My grandfather. He looked up, and his eyes were wet. Me. No. Haldren did not find you at the gate, Vesla. No. He took you. Kavar's voice cracked. The rolls say the last house of the speakers was ended in the frost of that year, and that not one of them was left, and the rolls are wrong because they missed a child of 7. And the man who had taken everything from you had a choice about what to do with her, and he made the cleverest choice a man in his position has ever made. He did not send you after them. The king put both hands flat on the table. He kept you where he could see you, in a kitchen where you would never be taught to read, and never hear an old song, and never in your life stand close enough to a right to hear the call. Because the words do not wake on their own, Vesla. They wake when they are called, and he made absolutely certain that no one would ever call you. Vesla thought about a mild, patient voice. You are not a clever girl. "You're not a beautiful one, but you are a useful one." She thought about 11 years of being told exactly how small she was, kindly at intervals, by a man who was not cruel to her, who was never cruel to her, who fed her and clothed her and gave her a corner. "He was not being unkind to me," she said, and her voice came out very strange. "He was keeping the lid on. Yes. He built me." She was shaking. "Everything I think I am. He built it. On purpose. He put me in the one room in this house where I could not hear anything worth hearing, and he made me proud of it." "Yes. And then I got sent up to the high table," said Vesla, "because a kitchen ran out of wine." "Yes," said Kavar. "And I have thanked every god I do not believe in every night since." And then she saw it. It arrived all at once, the way the words did, from somewhere underneath her, and she watched it come and could not stop it. "You were in the kitchens," she said. He went very still. "You were in the kitchens for a week, in a grey coat. And on the night of the Feast of the Turning, you were standing one pace to my left, at the wall, holding a jug." Her whole body had gone cold. "Out of 200 servants in this house, Kavar, you were standing next to me. Vesla, you knew." He did not deny it. "Say, I am wrong. Say you did not know what I was, before I ever opened my mouth." "I did not know," said the king. "I suspected." The room tilted. "I had a name off the old rolls," he said, and every word cost him. "I had a child taken in the year of the frost, and a steward who had raised her out of charity, and 100 years of silence I could not explain. I had a guess, and it was a thin one, and there was exactly one way in the world to test it." He looked at her, and he did not look away. "So I went down into my own kitchens and I found you, and I put myself beside you, and I spoke the call where you could hear it. You used me. I needed to know if the line was alive. You put yourself next to me," Vesla said, "and you waited to see if I would bleed." "Yes," said Kwamar. She could not breathe. "And after," she said, "the token, the tea, the questions. What did you see?" "Vesla, who came to the council wing. What did the northern envoy say?" 4 weeks. She was crying now and she did not care. "You were not asking me. You were sharpening me at first. Do not." She threw up a hand. "Do not do the thing where the answer is good. Do not stand there and be reasonable at me. Then I will be unreasonable," said the king, and his voice broke wide open. "I fell in love with you in a passage under my own house, while you told me my palace was a set of veins, and I have not had a clean hour since, because every single day I have had to look at you and know that I found you the way a man finds a weapon." The silence went on for a long time. "Why did you not tell me?" she said, and Kavar of Kerith, who had never once failed to have an answer ready, stood in the lamplight and told her the truth. "Because if I had told you what you were," he said, "you would have gone to Haldren, and you would have asked him if it was true, and he would have looked at you with that kind, patient face, and he would have told you no, and you would have believed him." Vesla opened her mouth. Nothing came out, because he was right, and they both knew it, and that was the thing that finally broke her, standing there in the archive, with her own name written 100 years ago in a hand that had died before she was born. "You should have told me, anyway," she said. "Yes," said the king. "I know." She left him standing there with the lamp and the rolls and the ruin of it, and she walked out into the dark of the corridor, and the door swung shut behind her. And a voice from the shadows at the end of the passage said, very gently, "Oh, child. Oh, my poor girl. What has he done to you?" Haldren opened his arms. And Vesla, who had known that voice since she was 7 years old, who had been fed by that hand, and clothed by it and taught by it exactly how much of the world she was allowed to want, walked straight into them and put her face against his shoulder and let him hold her while she cried. She cried because it was the only thing left to do. She cried the way she had cried at 9 when the fever took the scullery boys, and at 13 when they told her she would never be more than she was, and Haldren stood in the dark corridor and stroked her hair and made the small, mild noises he had always made. "I know," he murmured. "I know. Hush now. I have known since the first night, and I have been sick with it because I could not think how to tell you." She went very quiet against his shoulder. "He has used you," Haldren said. "Of course he has. His house has always used us, Vesla. That is the whole of what a king is." It was his grandfather's grandfather who ended the speakers in a single winter, because he could not bear to be told the truth in his own hall. And this one found the last of them scrubbing his pans, and thought, well, there is a use for that. Her hands, out of sight against his back, closed slowly into fists. "He has not," said Vesla, "told me any of that. Of course he has not. He said the stewards did it." It was warm and rueful and exactly right, and Vesla stood inside the circle of his arms and listened to the shape of it with the only sense she had ever been given. It was a lie. It went through her like cold water. Not a suspicion, not a doubt, not the reasoning of a frightened woman putting two things beside each other. It was the flat, absolute, physical certainty of a bell struck wrong. He was lying, and he was lying about who had killed her house, which meant he knew who had killed her house, which meant her whole life turned over in the space of one breath. "What do I do?" she whispered, and she felt him relax. "You are going to be very brave," said Haldren, "and it is going to be the hardest thing you have ever done." He set her back from him gently and looked into her face with all that mild, patient love. "The Northern King sits in the East Council Chamber. He has not signed. He is looking for a reason, and he does not know that the man who has been feeding him poison about Kareth is standing in this very corridor. But never mind that now. Never mind that now." She had not said it. He had said it. "You will go to him," said Haldren, "and you will tell him what Kyver has done to you. The last speaker of the old blood kept as a servant, lied to, taken to bed to be used. There is not a king in the world who could hear that and still sign." His hand tightened on her arm. "It must come from you, child. It cannot come from me. I am only a steward." But the moon-bound herself, weeping in front of a foreign court, and Kaevar of Kareth is finished by morning, and better men will steady the realm, and you and I will go on. As we always have. Stay small." Vesla lifted her face and let him see it wet. "All right," she said. The East Council chamber was full. King Orsan at the head of the long table, his envoys around him, and Kaevar standing at the far end with the gray exhaustion of a man who has lost everything twice in one night. And when the doors opened and he saw who came through them, and who came through them behind her, Vesla watched his face do something she would carry to her grave. He thought she had come to bury him. "I am sorry," she told him without a word. "I should have believed you." "Majesty," said Haldren, bowing to the Northern King, "it grieves me beyond speech to bring you this. But this woman has been wronged in this house, and she will tell you by whom." Every face in the room turned to her. Vesla stood in a green dress in front of a foreign king with 100 years of her family's dead, standing behind her, and she said, "He is right. I have been wronged in this house." Haldren's hand settled, warm and approving, on her shoulder. "But not by the king," she said. The room went absolutely silent. "My name is on a roll in the sealed archive," said Vesla, "and it is 100 years old, and the house it belonged to was ended in the winter of the frost, and not one of them came out of it but me. I was 7. The man who took me out of that house did not save me. He kept me. He put me in a kitchen for 11 years and taught me I was worth nothing, and he did it so that I would never hear the call and never wake." She turned her head and looked at the steward of Holomir. "Did you not, sir?" "She is distraught," said Haldren smoothly. "She has had a shock." 3 attempts have been made on the life of King Kyvar of Kareth in 2 months, Vesla said to the north. "The last was tonight, on the terrace, during your own feast, and it was hidden from you so that your treaty would not die." Somebody has been standing in a listening niche behind that council wall for a year, reading your sealed letters and writing you others. Search the steward's rooms while he is standing here, and cannot reach them, and see what you find." Huldrun's face did not move. "This is a servant girl," he said, "who has been taken to a king's bed and has lost her wits over it. I raised her. I know what she is." "Yes," said Vesla. "You do." And then, in front of the court of two realms, she turned and spoke to him in the old tongue. She asked him, in the language of the house he had murdered, whether the mouth that lied still feared the ear. And Huldrun, steward of Hollowmere, who had spent his whole life in rooms where nobody could understand a word of it, and who had heard the question of his nightmares asked out loud in the one voice that had a right to ask it, answered her. In the same tongue, 2 words. Before he could stop himself, the silence afterwards was the loudest thing Vesla had ever heard. "That language," said King Orsan slowly, "has been dead for 100 years." He was fast, and there was a knife, and she had known it would be there, and she had already put her hand out behind her and taken the lamp from the table and dropped it on the floor. The room went black. A council chamber full of men in the dark, and shouting, and the scrape of chairs, and one old man swinging a blade at where a girl in a green dress had been standing. But Vesla had been moving in the dark of this house since she was 7 years old. She went low, and left along the wall, the way she had gone 10,000 times with a tray on her shoulder, and she came up behind him, and she took his wrist in both hands and turned it the way you turn a jointed bird, and Huldrun of Hollowmere went down on the flagstones with a sound like a cracked plate. She put her knee on his back. She put her mouth by his ear. "You taught me to be invisible," she said. "You should not have taught me so well." Then the guards had him, and the lamps came up, and it was over. The Northern King went to search a steward's rooms. They took Lord Corvin of the North Wall before the hour was out, and 2 of the men who had been in the passage with the knives, and by dawn there was not a soul left in Hollowmere who had ever stood in that niche and listened. The court went out in a great churn of noise, and Vesla stood in the middle of the wreckage with her hands shaking and her leg on fire, and Kaivar came to her and stopped a pace away and said her name, like a question. "You saved me," he said, "after everything." "You still." "I saved the King of Kareth," said Vesla, "because a traitor had his hand on the crown, and because 2 realms were an hour from a war. That is all." The light went out of his face. "Vesla, do not." She stepped back. "You are alive. You will be a good king. I am glad." Her voice was perfectly steady, and it cost her everything she had. "But you looked me in the eye for 4 weeks, and you knew what I was, and you let me tell you I was nothing. I love you, I know," she said. "That is the worst part," and she walked out. They made her keeper of the house. It was a new office, and there had never been one, and the court hated it for about a fortnight and then discovered, to its enormous inconvenience, that the palace ran better. Vesla put names to 200 people who had never had them. She made the kitchen speak to the guards, and the guards speak to the stables. Andra wept, once, briefly, and denied it savagely afterwards. Mirren came back. Tobin, who was 16 now and still a realist, said that he had always known. She was good at it. She had always known she would be. She was also, in a way she could not admit to a single living soul, in ruins. Kivar did not send her flowers. That was the thing that undid her, in the end. He knew better. He never once sent her a thing that could be sent back. He sent her words. The first came a fortnight after, on a square of paper, in his own hand, with no greeting and no name at the bottom. There was a word, in the old tongue. And underneath it what it meant. Andra found her sitting on the kitchen step with it in her hand, and had the sense to say nothing. They came every day after that, 1 word a day. He had opened the sealed archive, and put 4 scholars in it, and set them to the reconstruction of a language 100 years dead, and every morning, whatever else was happening in the realm, 1 word came up the stairs to the keeper of the house. The word for a fire that is banked but not out. The word for the particular silence of a room somebody has just left. The word for a debt you are glad to owe. She did not answer a single one. She kept every single one. Sometimes there were other things on the paper. Not often. I am not asking. I know what asking is worth from a man who took without it. And once, near the bottom of a long page, she had promised herself she would not finish. You told me you were made small, and I have spent my life being told I was made charming, and neither of us was consulted. I would like very much to have been the man who asked you first what you wanted. I was not. I will be the man who never stops. Mirren, who had opinions about everything and had never once been shy of them, said it was the most disgraceful behavior she had ever seen in a monarch, and she said it with a great deal of enjoyment. Andra said only, 6 months, girl. I know how long it has been. Do you, said Andra, and went back to her pans. And then, in the 7th month, the word stopped. There was no letter. There was simply nothing on a Tuesday. And Vesla stood at her window with an empty hand and told herself that this was exactly what she had wanted. The next morning, a single square of paper came up the stairs, and it was the last one, and there was no word on it at all. I have run out, it said, not of wanting, of ways to say it that do not cost you something to read. You have made yourself clear, and I have made myself ridiculous, and only one of us has any excuse. So I will stop. You will not have to walk out of a room again. I hope you know that I would have chosen you in any life where I had been given the chance to choose. That was all. And Vesla, keeper of the House of Hollowmere, sat down on the floor of her own room with her back against the bed, and discovered that being right was the coldest thing that had ever happened to her. The feast of the turning came round again. The hall was fuller than it had ever been. The treaty had been signed in the spring, and the North had sent 30 of their own, and there were scholars now at the low tables where there had never been scholars, and the whole of Carith had spent a year talking about one thing and one thing only, which was whether she would do it. Vesla stood at the back, in the shadow by the wall, in the grey and white of the keeper's office, with no jug in her hand, and nowhere in particular to look. She had not had a true word out of him in a year, and the letters had stopped 5 months ago, and he had kept his promise every day since. He nodded to her in corridors. He said keeper, and she said majesty, and it was even, and it was courteous, and it was never cold, and it was killing her, by inches. The horn sounded. 200 people got to their feet, and Kavar of Carith stood up on the dais under the white moon of his house. And Vesla understood watching him exactly what he was about to do. He could have left it out. A king could change a right. He could have let the horn sound and gone straight to the toast, and nobody in that hall would have said a word, and every man in it knew it, and every man in it was waiting. He spoke it anyway. Under the old moon, said the king, and his voice went out across the hall like a stone skipped over still water. I greet the house of my blood, and the blood of my house, and the long road walked between them. And then he stood there. He stood there in front of 200 people and one foreign court, in a silence that stretched, and he did not look at the back of the hall. He had promised he would not ask, and he was keeping it, and he was going to stand up there and take the whole weight of that silence, in front of everybody he ruled, every year, for the rest of his life, rather than break his word to her. Somebody, somewhere near the middle tables, laughed. And something in Vesla, some small folded thing that had been made to fit inside a corner, stood all the way up. She stepped out of the shadow. She walked down the length of the great hall of Hollowmere, and the noise died as she went, table by table, like candles going out. She walked past the men who had never once looked up when she filled their cups. She did not hurry. Her leg ached, because it always would. She stopped at the foot of the dais, in the light, where every single person in the world could see her. Kavar was staring at her as though he had forgotten how to stand. Under the same moon, said Vesla, and she did not whisper it. I answer, and the road is walked, and the house is not alone. The hall made a sound like the sea. But she was not finished, because there was a third line, and there had always been a third line, and she had found it 2 months ago, in a language nobody had spoken for 100 years, and she finally understood why the stewards had been so very frightened of it. The greeting was not a fate, it was a question. And I answer freely, she said, into the ringing hall, straight into the face of the king of Kerith, because a speaker cannot be compelled, and never could be, and that is why they killed us. So hear it, I was not given to you. I was not owed to you, I choose. Kaivar came down off the dais. He did not walk. He came down those steps like a man going into water, and he took her face in both hands in front of the entire court, and his hands were shaking so badly, she had to hold his wrists. Say it again, he said. Which part? Any of it, said the king. All of it, every day, for the rest of my life. That, said Vesla, sounds like an enormous commitment. And Kaivar of Karith, who had been charming and untrue since he was 19 years old, put his forehead against hers in front of 200 people and laughed and cried, and did not do a single thing to hide either. They married in the autumn, the whole city came out for it. The boy king, nobody had taken seriously, and the palace waitress, who had heard everything and been asked nothing. Andra ran the kitchens and broke 3 ladles doing it. Tubin, age 17, wept openly and denied it. Mirren caught the flowers and looked appalled. And when it was done, and the hall was roaring, Kaivar bent his head to her ear. You know there is no undoing this, he said. You answered in front of witnesses. I have been in that hall for 12 years, said Vesla, and it is the first time anybody heard me. He kissed her. She had spent her whole life learning to be the room. She spent the rest of it being the one voice in it that could not be lied to, and there was never, from that day to the day they buried her at a great age, beside her king, another silence in the house of Halomir.